So if you've been anywhere on the internet recently, you have probably seen a conversation that has been waging on various places, whether it's the YouTube sphere, the Twitters, the Reddits. Everyone seems to be talking about this and having a conversation. Is the PlayStation 5 the worst launch and, subsequent first few years for a PlayStation console? Now, when talking about this, I feel like there are different directions you could go into. We actually talked about this a little bit on the Spawncast on Saturday night, but the more I thought about that conversation, the more I realized that it is a bit more nuanced than I really wanted to give it credit for. So I kind of wanted to elaborate in this video on why this is even a conversation, because I think that's really the important thing here. It's not about whether or not it is the worst or it isn't the worst. It's more so about why are we having this conversation in 2024? Now, I am someone who has been around for the launch of every PlayStation console, dating back to the PlayStation 1. I could sit here and tell you vividly when the first time I played a PlayStation 1 was. It was at this kid named Pablo's house. He had a brother named John P. My mom was friends with their mom. I went over there, they had Tekken, and they had Twisted Metal 1, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And since I was growing up, I of course played all of these consoles when they first came out. I saw the launches of them, I read the magazines, I worked at GameStop for some of these. So I'm someone who's been around for quite a while because, well, I'm old. I mean, that's just really what we have to break it down to here. And when you're looking at this, people automatically go to the software. And I think that does make sense, but I also feel like it's very short-sighted because you could sit there and compare games from one PlayStation console to another in terms of the first 3 or 4 years and be like, well, I like this game more than I like this game, but it's very subjective. People like different types of games. People play different types of games. Some people like first-person shooters. Some people like JRPGs. Some people like, sports games. Like, it's a very subjective thing when it comes down to just comparing software to software. And I don't think this conversation necessarily involves the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2, because if there's anyone out there saying that the PlayStation 1 or the PlayStation 2's launch window is worse than the PlayStation 5's, that's not someone you want to listen to. That's not so. Don't follow them on Twitter. Don't subscribe to their YouTube channel, because there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And I'm not trying to be mean here, but I am being mean. There is something wrong with you if you think that. Please seek help, talk to someone, do something. But I kind of identified two main factors here as to why this is a conversation. And I think that this kind of shines a different light, because there's really no right or wrong answer. It just comes down to what you prefer and what you are enjoying, and really, to some degree, how old you are, how many of these generations you've been around. But why is this even a conversation? I think it is because of two specific reasons. The first reason being the fact that we saw a lot of cross-generational games from the PlayStation 5 to the PlayStation 4, taking into account the PS3, the PS4, and the PS5, because I feel like that's what the conversation is kind of surrounding. Many people will say, oh, the PS3 was the worst console because of the fact that it got out of the gate very slowly. It had, issues with terms of developing games for it and stuff like that. And you could definitely say that. But when you look at the PlayStation 5, a lot of these games, first-party games, were also cross-generational stuff. Your Horizon, your God of War Ragnarok, your Gran Turismo 7. That's not necessarily something you saw with the previous consoles. Obviously not on the PlayStation 3. You got HD versions of games, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. And then with the PlayStation 4, you had, The Last of Us got re-released on there. But, beyond that, they were doing games within established IPs. They were doing new sort of stuff. There wasn't a whole bunch of PlayStation 4 games that you could play on your PlayStation 3. And because of that, I feel like just the cross-generational stuff, which from a business perspective does obviously make sense. From a gamer perspective, it kind of does dampen the experiences for you, because it's kind of like, well, why did I buy a PlayStation 5? Did I really need this if I want to play God of War? Did I really need this if I wanted to play Spider-Man? Did I really need this if I wanted to play Gran Turismo 7? Like, yeah, you know, there are some differences in terms of it, but it's still pretty much the same experience that you would get on the PlayStation 4. One thing I like about new console generations is the fact that we kind of, you know, break the seal. Like, yeah, there have been some very successful games that have been cross-generational. Stuff like, you know, Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild and stuff like that. But it's not the standard. You know, the new Mario game isn't launching on both Nintendo consoles. It's launching on the new one. So I feel like for a lot of people, that kind of dampened the experience that the PlayStation 4, or the PlayStation 5, I should say, offered you straight out of the gate. But I think the other reason is because we're at the point of diminishing returns with these systems. When you look at the PlayStation 3, you could say whatever you want about some of those games. And look, some of those games were not very good games that were at the launch window, that were first party games. They tried to, you know, involve the 6-axis controller. You remember that? And nobody really cared for it. It was like, hey, get this away from me. But you had to admit, the PlayStation 3 games looked amazing comparative to the PlayStation 2, because we're in the HD era. There was no way, you know, you could do, I guess, component cables on a PS2, but it's still not going to look anywhere near as good as the PlayStation 3 games would. Even if you did not like the games themselves, you had to admit there was that sort of wow factor as we were entering the HD generation of video games. Now, the jump to the PlayStation 3 to the PlayStation 4 was definitely not quite as big, but still, there was something to it. There were some graphically impressive games that you looked at that and you were like, well, that can't be done on a PlayStation 3. This is incredible. This looks so much better than what we saw there. Like, yeah, it might not stick out completely, but if we're talking about things like frame rate, which is an important part of performance, and resolution, you're definitely noticing an increase. But can you really say that with the PlayStation 5? Once again, I have to go back to the fact that we're talking about cross-generational games with very minor differences in terms of graphics and frame rate. Like, yeah, you might get some lighting and stuff like that, and, you know, that is impressive enough. That does sort of lead to a better visual experience. But when the jumps are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, you don't have that kind of as a crutch to lean back on. You don't have, well, you know, the game wasn't that good, but it looked really good. And, you know, that frame rate was really cool. You know, I might not like Ridge Racer 7. I believe Ridge Racer 7 was the PS3 game. I might not like Ridge Racer 7 more than I like Ridge Racer 2 in terms of gameplay, but the graphics look better. They look way better. The performance of the game is way better. I just prefer maybe the cars or the tracks of Ridge Racer 2. You don't really have that conversation with the PlayStation 5 unless you're looking very closely at things like lighting and shadows and stuff like that, where you and I probably notice stuff like that, but does the average consumer? And that's really one of the questions that we're having with this. I don't think that there is a right or wrong answer. If you were to ask me right now, you know, what rank the PlayStation consoles as far as the first couple of years of the systems, I would go PS2, PS1, PS3, PS4, PS5. And that's just my personal opinion. If someone had this completely different, unless that PS2 and PS1 weren't like the top two in at least some sort of order, you know, that's fine. It really just comes down to personal preference. If the PlayStation 5 is your favorite PlayStation console of all time, then that's good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. But I just wanted to kind of talk about why this is a conversation in the first place. And I feel like You know, like I said, you could sit there and compare game to game. You could sit there and you go, Heavenly Sword. Look at Heavenly Sword. That game stinks. Like, nobody likes that. You had Miles Morales with the launch of the PlayStation 5. You had Demon Souls with the launch of the PlayStation 5. Which, I mean, was a PlayStation 3 game. Let's be realistic. But I feel like it goes deeper than that. I feel like you have to sort of look at, you know, what is happening industry-wise, you know, what is happening in terms of graphical and technological leaps and stuff like that. I feel like it is very nuanced. But it is an interesting conversation. And I think the reason we're having this conversation is because 2024 doesn't look like a banner year for Sony, but, you know, everything can change in a year. Everything can change. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section down below. How do you rank the PlayStation consoles? Because remember, I am the king of PlayStation YouTube. Hey, pal, this is a back-to-back PlayStation sort of thing. Mystic Ryan shaking in his boots over there. He's like, oh, man, here comes RGT. I had the PlayStation stuff on lock for a while, but now RGT's finally woke up. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new. Also, if you have a Facebook page, please be sure to like the Art of N64 Wrestling Games Facebook group. I guess it's not a group, I guess it's a page, but I'll be doing updates on the book there. We're getting very close to completion, and I'm very excited for this. Check out my social medias in the description box down below. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Later.